Can I still escape? Can I just run away and pretend I don't exist? Can you please? Yes, please, 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 please. I think I'm live, and I'm calling it a shit show today. We gotta get the shit show started. Just wanted to say this because why not? What's up, Cube? Cube Media. See both. What's up, Suvoli? What's up? Sega Sentinel, you're the butt. Butts. Vera Sketch, what's up? It's not gonna. Is it a good show? Is it a bad show? I don't even know. It's just it is what it is. Often enough, it's not enough. So it just is what it is. Still making progress. Worked on arms, and yesterday when I did my food, something hit me. So I did this one. Yeah, I did this one. I collected some references to like spark synapses in my brain, figure things out. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Folding space, fun stuff. Can I suppose I gotta hold myself on a leash because I could rant. I could already rant about perspective grids. And I gotta contact some dude about some insight into the perspective books out of curiosity. And let's say if I actually find out these books, the books that are like the Holy Grail perspective books. If I were to chew through them and find out that they don't have this specific information that I am looking for, I feel like I'm allowed to rant, which I'm not. It's like, yeah, I'm just this one guy that claims to know things, and then I'm fighting against these decades and decades of bad education. Well, that's kind of what I would call this. That's kind of what I would call this. And not to say that using perspective grids is bad, because people do get the idea, including Kim Jong-ji, but still, many people don't get the idea of how it works. So let's say you get stuck on grids and you don't really know how to properly, fold space, or let's say have space be dynamic and flexible instead of rigid and just set in stone or something. And it started. This was the first building. This one in the middle there, and then I just went down, and I kind of stopped at this point. Then I did left and I did right, but I kind of wanted to pull this down so far that you actually get the idea. Where's the camera? Can push my switch here. 3-point perspective is not that hard, and 1 and 2-point perspective it will get you very far. Kind of did this one, tried something else, I tried something new. I kind of wanted to experiment with different types of architecture, which completely failed, by the way. I'm just gonna remove this. It's okay looking. This is fine. This is just protected. It collects some more references for some more interesting architecture. Figure out the shapes instead of just cubes. I suppose we can just jump in. Do you do grids for your perspective? It's not about the wider it gets, and let's say Frank, one guy in my. It's basically like the way you draw, and this is it only is because this is the way we can draw and we can have our perspective space, right? 1 point perspective. Then we can have another one of this, like the entire cube is my space. And if I actually cut this, right, like I can confine this to my picture frame. So it is limited. It ends. It doesn't go infinities. So I can still take this and just extend the space 3 times, and I have 3, 4, 5 vanishing points inside my space. This can be one space. So this can still exist on your paper, and instead of having the space being this small, I extend the space and make it this big. Still, there is one main vanishing point. This one. And still in front of me I have all these things that still show more vanishing points. So this kind of stuff only works because you take pieces of perspective that are not natural or not native. And let's say you have your main space. And it can already be a cube in perspective, so we see it from above and we're all happy. So this could be the building top, right? So something I did with the first space, I extended. Right? This is, you have to think about space is not confined, space is infinite. The only way that space is limited by is the container that holds the space. So if you have your cup, your teacup, and look inside your cup, look inside a glass, there is space inside the cup, which is limited by the container. If you increase the container, you have more space inside. So the picture frame, essentially my canvas size, is my container. And I can extend the container. So I have my cube in perspective. And this is my container. And I'm working at first with the first plane. This is my top plane that still connects to my cube. So I'm extending this thing towards infinity. And if you want this to be, this can be a aerial view where you have buildings, you have roads, you have more buildings. This is kind of what happens, and we all know this. If we think about our perspective grid, we are far off to the side because we don't see the cube. And technically, it's already getting weird because if I look at this one, I did not extend the space linear. And this is where you think about, you take different things from perspective and you basically do this. You have your main space and then you extend it with a different impression of perspective and another different impression. And instead of keeping these impressions the same, like I did with this one, it's all the same. You basically connect one place with perspective with another place of perspective, with another place of perspective, with another place of perspective. And then it basically goes on. Because from any of these points, you can extend your space, not just linear to forward and backward. You can take this cube. you can extend it forward and back into space. And this is, my friends, XYZ. I have one axis, I have a second axis, and I have this guy. So we can do the logical thing, and I know I gotta read up chat, we can extend the space this way, we can extend the space this way, and just say, for the sake of clarification, we can have objects in these places in space. Vera, thanks for doing what you do. Appreciate the streams greatly. Oh, thanks for the bits. That is a crazy amount of bits. You're crazy, my man. You're crazy, and I have no idea why the bit message doesn't show up. Thanks, crazy. You're crazy. Thank you. So something would happen, and this is because our space is not extended linear, where there is no size change, there's no distortion, there's nothing happening that could give us the idea of vanishing points, because there is none. Meaning, this line is still the same size as this one. And usually, when things move forward into space, they have to get bigger. So this is already reflected in the first square. And I will have to ask you guys, how is this reflected? How does this square actually show there is space and depth and distance? And to make it easier, I will give you letters and labels A, B, C, and D. If you compare to this, A, B, C, and D, compare D with B, and then basically compare A and C. No, that's the thing is it does not only work if the ground is flat. The thing is, if this is the concept of perspective, and this is where I exist because I can draw things because practice. So I have to take you guys back to get the basic ideas. You have to make the basic connections, and then this is still the basic principle. But I'm taking what I'm explaining, and you have to break this. You have to first understand this to break this effectively. Otherwise, you will get lost because um, the progression through space is defined and universal. All you have to know, all you have to understand is how to reflect this, how to show this on paper. And this is basically it. At first, you have your top line, and you can extend space. So again, so how does it work? How does it work? Can you fold space? The thing is, you have the choice, and it's an interesting point. And if you look at these planes, they are aligned like your ground is flat. If you do something else, you can form a curve, and therefore your space will curve. Where's the difference? There is none, because this is still your space, and it is slowly bending, as in it's not flat anymore. Yeah, if you feel technically yes. Technically yes. But see, instead of staying onto something flat, you have to know how to bend your space in any way, so that when you say this only works if the ground is flat, it's true and it is false, and it's most definitely false, because this is just a thing that I would do and I would share and I would use to understand the basic steps before you really understand how to bend space, or let's say draw perspectives that not give you the impression of something being flat. And if you look at this stuff, there is curvature in it. in a kind of weird way. There is a weird kind of curvature that actually happens at this place inside the space. It's actually kind of curved. This is what I perceive. This is a little bit curved to get towards this area. Because let's say if I draw a stick and I can't even draw it because the camera is sitting on this place. And then the perspective is doing this, and there's a clear vanishing point at this part. And then what happens to the left and right bit? There is a vanishing point, and it's going into the distance. And you have the same thing at this place. This is wrong, right? Technically, where did it go? There's a mistake. It's definitely a mistake. Perspective. So again, you have to start at the basics. Where's my layers? And about the extending space, that is kind of it. So when you do extend your space, then you would start with your main square. This is a one-point perspective square. How to make an emoji with draw on the floor? I don't know. So something would happen if you move over too far to the left or to the right, and essentially if you move too far to the front. This would technically grow so big. And this would still vanish. And again, I can choose between having this go into the distance, so basically taking this to the side, and then instead of deciding to move this to the back, I can decide to move this around. And we can all remember what's the movie name? Inception. This is a choice, including basically deciding where the vanishing point would go in this place. And again, you can decide to bend your form, bend your space. It kind of happens by choice, but there is something else that makes sense of things. In this one, it kind of took a little bit concentration, more than a little bit, to figure out how to, make it look okay. And then transitioning to this point, basically, of going back and forth. Again, there's something, it used to make sense. Now it doesn't. If I think about it too much, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. But here's something for the 1-2 point perspective. And what is the issue with 3-point perspective? And in general, I did this step by step to help myself figure out how this works. These are your 3 planes, and these have the vanishing point. So the first one, 1-point perspective only exists because there's a plane. Let's say we have one plane, and I think, is this technically, can this exist? I think it can't. Like, I would believe that this cannot exist. So, my idea is, this is me, and I have depth in front of me. I have these 2 points. One is closer to my face, The other one is further away. So, and this is something reality tells us. If it goes further away, it is small. If it is close, it is big. So I have this line basically being the big one because it's closer to me, and I have the small one. This is what I do. I don't think about where is my vanishing point, like make dots in some point or some place on my canvas. This is not something I do, not in my mind. So what I do is I think about this. How close is it? How far does it go away? So I know I have something big and then I have something small. The placement of this line within this kind of space, it's like basically this one. It could be anywhere. And this is already changing the perspective, because in this view, I'm in a different place. In this view, I basically moved from this location to this location. This is why this line is flat, because it basically is sitting in front of my face. If I'm standing in the middle, both of these lines, left and right, they would converge. This would shrink, and I have these one basically symmetrical, because I'm standing in this place. Eye line horizon. It's the only horizon that is really important. This is like depending on what you do, and this is you have to make a kind of experiments, and even placing the line outside of my line space. In this case, it is outside. In this case, it is still staying inside. It does not cross to the outside, but it could, like this in this case. And I still have a one-point perspective plane that is highly sexy. It is super sexy. I can extend this, right? Like left and right, and I can go up. But technically, I could go up and make this a bridge. Super ugly bridge. So, in general, you could always say that yes, there is a vanishing point. It's always there. It goes where the plane goes. If the plane goes someplace else, if you stick it on a stick and you swing it around, you rotate this, and in this case, this is your leading line, right? You have two of these. They point towards the vanishing point. If this thing is rotating and it's suddenly shooting off into the distance in any other different direction, your vanishing point will follow along, because if you have something small there and something big somewhere else and you connect these two lines, your vanishing point, huzzah, right? So again, I can stick something onto my plane and basically stick it on a stick and decide if I want to rotate this around. I can face it off in this direction. And again, I can face it into any direction. I can make this into an arrow. This could be an arrow that is sticking on a stick and it's swinging around into space. So the vanishing point would follow along because this is my only plane. So something big, something small. This is like the basic approach. And then we have two new planes that we could see. We have two new planes, and basically the same thing applies. The same thing applies. We know that this is in the distance, so it is smaller. This is still close. This is doing what it does. This is big because it is closer at us. So this guy, and we can technically choose this plane or this plane. This is number 3. This is number 2. 1. Yes. So this guy has to be small. This guy. This guy has to be big. This guy has to be big. This guy, which is basically the bottom, has to be small, because where are we in the space? Like, where is our little dude guy that is defining if it is closer, if it is further away? And we know he's standing somewhere in this place. And technically, eye level horizon is already defined by, we see this plane from the top. if we align our eyeline horizon with this edge, and technically, if we completely align, we see this. If we move our eyes up, we see more of the plane, including how far it goes into the distance. And then we can choose the 2-point perspective first, and we operate with the plane number 3, so it does go down, so it has to be small. Just like this one, it is further away. And we connect these and we have 2-point perspective. Something we have to keep in mind is that if we move our eyes, like to the left or the right, we can experiment freely with the placement of the small line this way. We can experiment freely with the placement of the lower line, but this is still, it might not give us the right result. This is still a plane in perspective. If it stands alone, it works, because it's following the basic principle: if it is big, it is close; if it is small, it's further away. So technically, to simplify this, I can rotate this around 90 degrees, and it might be easier to see the plane, or to see the space and the depth and the distance. So when going for the third vanishing point, this is really tricky. Because this line, this line, this line, these are the important ones. As long as they stay parallel, they have no vanishing point. They create the vanishing point the moment I take this one and it has a slight angle like this. And this one gets an angle like this. Because these guys are pointing at it. If these lines stay parallel, they are not pointing at it. They are still pointing somewhere, but not where they meet. So if these go down all the way to infinity, they will eventually meet at the point that we seek. So we don't want this crazy cube, so we say we cut it. We just take a knife and slice it. So if we stay parallel with our lines, there's no vanishing point. If we stay parallel, no vanishing point. The moment we angle these down like this, and we say, huzzah, there's a cut. Because you can always draw these through to your vanishing point, and then you say you don't want all of this because you want the cube. Technically, you have a triangle that leads to your vanishing point, but you want the slice that builds your square. And these are your squares. Remove this and you have 2 squares. Then again, draw these down parallel, no vanishing point. Because something is big, and this is the big one. You want something small in the distance, then you connect these and you have your 2-point perspective. What does it mean? Fisheye equals vanishing point. Is the fisheye perspective the outcome of vanishing points? No. 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 Anything is a vanishing. It's like, it doesn't work this way. It doesn't work this way. You only have a vanishing point if something is vanishing there. So let's say I have a space. This is my space. Where's the vanishing point? It's anywhere. But I need something like this guy. And then I have to, move it into space where this thing is further away from me, so I make it smaller. And then I can decide where do I put it, because it can be anywhere. The moment I would draw a dot, it makes sense. But the thing is, my plane has Bob. This is Bob. The line Bob is an arrow. And we have Jeff. These 2 guys, Bob and Jeff, wherever they are, they may be parallel, but they always point to something I don't even know. It's like the Holy Grail, the Holy Ghost, the I don't know, life, light. I don't know. They point towards something. So if Bob or Jeff decides to, oh my God, I'm so tired, I want to slap, and they get an angle, it's like a different state, right? The line is not vertical or horizontal anymore. So what is this guy doing? But the line that Bob or Jeff are pointing, it has to follow. And so suddenly they will meet. And then because they vanish at this point. And vanishing is the weird concept of where you have something. Let's say we have a door or like a fence. And the fence is so long that eventually it reaches like the horizon and it is so small it doesn't even exist anymore. But if we move along the fence, it's still the fence. So we call this the vanishing point because our object disappears, as in it vanishes. It's still there, it still exists. So why is it there? If I take my door, if I take my fence and I say, okay, let's say, okay, my vanishing point is there, meaning my fence, the square plane, this is big, and this guy has to be smaller because it's further away. It creates the vanishing point. And let's say, instead of saying it is small, I make it so tiny that it's just a point. It should be at this point, it should be like jaws should drop. So again, if I have a plane, it would point at the vanishing point because Bob and Jeff, they're like, look there, look, just look. So again, something small. It could be anywhere. And if I have multiple planes inside the same space, all of these, they have their own vanishing point. So again, if we want to think about the 3-point perspective, we have to keep in mind basically the space and the depth and the distance, so that eventually we have something that I'm still weirdly troubled by this. And again, I'm going for 2-point perspective more than anything because this guy, it needs an angle. And this is what I ignore, so that these guys, they would essentially follow. Small, big, fine. This works. A little bit too much. There's something wonky in the planes, but otherwise this would work. So there's the size change. This is my big guy because he's at front. These guys are smaller because they're far away. This guy's smaller. And these two lines, left and right, they are not straight down. They have this angle. They need this angle because they have to point at the vanishing point. Otherwise, there's no distortion. So whatever the perspective grid tells you, it's something that I looked at and analyzed without really doing many grids. The perspective grid is, at first, it's limiting your space. And essentially your space is always limited by your canvas size. So still the perspective grid is rigid and it's not really flexible enough to do anything like this because the perspective is on the fly. This perspective grid would show the change between the planes that are on your left and on your right. So what I look at is this guy. It has an angle, and this guy. And between these two, I have step-by-step angle change. Any of these lines could be another cube, and essentially these still build your grid. I'm looking at the angle change because it is defining part of this thing, where I have this. And technically look at the main building. This is the first 1-point perspective plane, and it has a symmetry line going through. And then you have these guys, and I use object lines to follow my grid. and you have the same change. It goes left, right, it goes like this, and right, it goes like this, where you have angle change from something that used to be vertically, and it suddenly starts to shift to something horizontal. And in this case, it doesn't quite do so in this case, but it still changes. Again, we had this with the extension of space. These are your grid lines. And they remain the same angle. They do not change. Therefore, your space does not change. If you keep these changing from something vertically, because this is where your eye level horizon is, and basically you get the idea of symmetry, where it's the same thing, right? Like this. And you are in the middle. So if I keep these angles differently from every place, meaning I shift them from something vertically to something horizontally, I have all of these layers. And depending on where I move these into something smaller, I have my vanishing points, and they can be anywhere. So this is angle change, right? It happens from the left to the right. It happens up and down. And let's say I would look at this angle and this angle. So if this building was bigger, it would be so big, something would have to happen, just like with this building, because it's big. If I follow this angle down step by step, I have my perspective grid, and essentially these would point and meet. So let's say I can remove this and say there's a different building there. But again, from the line that is basically on the ground, this one, to the line that is on top, between these I have angle change. And this too is a plane of your perspective grid. So if I rotate this around 90 degrees, I have a grid on the ground, but it is on the side. So it's the same stuff, right? But it happens horizontally and vertically. And still you have angle change that, depending on where you move in your space, you can say that the camera is not on top of this building, but it is in fact on top of this building, because we see this building basically from the top. Because the perspective is giving us the illusion that there is the transition between seeing this building basically from the front. And what I'm basically doing is I take this top plane and I draw this through, which I'm not really doing, but this is what I'm doing. I'm drawing this through so far that I would essentially have the place where the camera is standing. So again, I have the place where I say I can fake the illusion of space and depth by making things smaller. And this is the thing, right? So this is the basic perspective grid. And basically we are sitting on top of this city. And this could actually work, right? So if we have like this crazy large big building, essentially these lines, and this is where it gets weird, because the space would bend, where this goes still back and then it comes forward again. Something would happen to this, otherwise there's your plane. This is really weird, but it's very small. And only because I don't know optics or something, I use the curve because it shows the deformation of space. And essentially, this is not really shown overall. It's rather, again, I'm choosing to distort the perspective, but at the same time, I'm trying to keep it sensitive. So again, we have our grid. And because we are looking at it like this, we have a normal kind of, let's say we have a hole inside our grid like this. It's like a box. So again, we have these angles that basically sit on the left, and that would be the plane. So something would happen if we get to the point where we basically look down, because these lines would still follow the vanishing point that is right in front of our face. And let's say these lines, they should also follow the place. Let's say we could have a secondary plane, and this is where it gets really funky because I usually don't do this. So the second plane would basically be our ground plane, and but we can't make it bigger. Like we have our original plane, so we have to make it bigger at first, but then it goes further away because things get smaller because they are further away, and this again gets so weird. And you can see how this wouldn't even work. So undo this. So, and this I use this stuff to, let's say, even right now for the stream, to make sense of things. It's like me looking at what I do, like more or less naturally, to then make sense of things. But sometimes it doesn't work. It only works so far. Technically, it might never work. But so the perspective would change depending on where we see things. And let's say the place, if we have train tracks, like this technically could be train tracks, right? Where we have, let's say these train tracks, they go to the distance. We have these big clumps. So the train tracks, and at some point we know we have to reach the point where we are standing. Basically from this point we would see everything from the top. The weird thing is, and I thought about it this way, so these are the train tracks with these different blocks in between. This is us standing. And let's say if we imagine that the way we see things, like this would our image be if we look through, right? Like we are looking through a frame. And in this case, in the case of this crazy distorted perspective where we still see things from the top where we are standing, the basic plane that we use to see the space basically is bent. So that we, in this case, for the flat plane, we can't really get any light into our plane from stuff that is behind the lens itself. So the lens would have this curve, so it could still get basically the space visually into its lens. This is technically you can say the lens is curved, otherwise the space is curved, which is still the same thing in a way. But this is kind of how it makes sense of it. I'd say it could even work if the lens, let's say, is completely bent, because in this case the light can still get in these weird things. And technically, if anybody ever did photography, you can see sometimes you have these, it's not artifacts, but when you look at the picture, and technically like the frame, the picture frame has to be covered by the lens. If your lens is smaller, it wouldn't even reach these areas, so there would be some, I don't know, there is a word, aberrations? I don't know, but there's something happening. Sometimes it can result in natural vignettes, which is kind of sexy. I like vignettes. My brain. So I'm still trying to make sense of things. Okay, let's go back to our 3-point thing one more. And I usually stay in 2-point perspective because it's easy. Like natural appearing cubes, even this one, it's still 2-point perspective, even 3-point, because I can still flip the space, basically decide what is the scale of my space. Even though you see it like this, I can have the one cube basically sit there, and this is for making this. So okay. And I explained this earlier about extending the space. Oh my god, wrong buttons. Extending the space. And this is kind of a little bit wonky, but you get the idea because the lines, they keep the same angle. Same angle. If I change this angle from something to this, to this, to this, to this, I have angle change. And you might remember because I explained this. Alright, angle change. Very good. So angle change would be a direct kind of way to define the space and the perspective. Think about this. You have a line that goes from this place to this place to this place. And technically it means nothing. But this is where I see a triangle as a form that is in space. Because it is vanishing there and I choose to see it this way. And it will always be this. Triangle first, cut it in part, connect these lines, and what do you have? 2-point perspective. From what? Basically 2 triangles. Yeah. So we have this guy, and we can look at this line. If it stays the same, no change in space. If I do the same thing that I did on the other side and keep this around slowly, you get the idea. And this again, I have different buildings, different parts of different things that form my perspective grid. So what we can know, what we can see essentially, is that we would be, as the observer, we would be in this place. And still we would also be not beyond this place. And I say this because these lines, they are more or less vertically. And somewhere in between there would be one that is also vertically. So technically we can extend this way and this way, this way. And let's say we would have this kind of weirdly distorted, this is really ugly by the way, but we have a perspective grid. If we continue this further down, we would essentially find the place where the camera would stand, even though this is crazy distorted. But it still works if you think about this being a building. So the building has a front, there could be another building, and this would go to the vanishing point where this is this kind of road crossing, there's like traffic lights, maybe trees and something. So there would be humans standing on this thing. And then there's the other side of the road, and this too is something we know because there's another building. And then I can essentially, create another vanishing point by just choosing where this thing goes, which connects to another sidewalk, which then connects to another road that just goes there. This is a little bit too much distortion for my tastes. But there's another traffic light. Another building. Cube box. Thing. A little bit too much. How much sense am I making from 1 to 10? I hope I'm still making sense. This doesn't make sense. Analysis. analysis really is a weird kind of magic thing. Let's say understanding the building blocks that lead and build and make and create and form and find something. The illusion of perspective. Know them, and you will not need grids. Like, for the sake of things being fun and enjoyable, and like grids can become such a crutch. And there's still like knowing these silly things. And I honestly don't know how books talk about this stuff because I never used the book, so I can't really say. I probably absorbed the general the basics because I know what vanishing points are, I know how to build grids and such. So yes, but still, books are the worst. They're the worst. Let's say the way you can be free with the space by knowing a little bit. And again, I explained this where I had the space. Where is it? Where's my space going? Is it? Okay, there, like linear space. And we know what would happen if things are above and things suddenly change in size and change perspective. But putting this on paper, I don't know. It doesn't make sense just by knowing how things are supposed to look. Just knowing how things are supposed to look doesn't enable me or grant me the ability to replicate things on a flat canvas. So the part about extending space linear is the one thing. And then knowing how to have your space and then extending the space by basically not keeping the lines the same. You are bending space by basically changing this. This is, there's so much in this. There's too much, and I would boggle my own mind because, like, doing this, I couldn't do this if I didn't grind my understanding and analysis about the simple, most stupid stuff, which essentially starts at figuring out eyeline perspective on the fly so that I know how far above I am from this cube. Because let's say if I am inside the space, I would basically extend the space this way, extend the space over this way, and say I am elevated this much. And then I would basically connect my face to the secondary plane. And then I can draw it over this way. I can have a secondary cube in this place. And if there is a cube that is basically my eyeline horizon, which is this me, the line would be completely flat. And then it goes this way. If the cube is higher, and this is where the fun begins, because the cube that is higher than me, it doesn't always look like this linear extension of the space, right? We know this. Something else would happen because there's depth. This would go smaller. This would be bigger. In this case, this could be the okay size. But if it goes further away, it has to go smaller. We know this, which essentially would lead to a kind of deformation that leads to things being curved. Because the step by step progression. Right? And still, we have angle change going down into space. This is the base angle. And it goes more extreme, right? And then it kind of tilts out. It becomes completely horizontal because eye level horizon. And then what does it do? Does it stay the same? No, it doesn't, because it becomes more and more and more, and then it goes extreme. And technically it still shrinks in size. And if we would connect this and just say we cut it off this place, we would have something like this. It still looks bigger, right? That is the point. We can have something on the other side, and all we gotta do is keep this in mind. So the line is not completely flat, but it has an angle. This is where it goes down. So this angle, they change like the states. And I came up with this recently or yesterday. How do we make sense of the things that we see? And when I look at the way I draw, second. Every line has meaning. So I would define states of my lines, which is like, what is my line doing when I just draw this? And we have a word for this. This is vertically. We have a word for this one, horizontally. Why do we have this? Maybe, but it does help. It does help to make sense of things. So I would go from these two basic states to something like this. And just keeping in mind that I have an angle difference, right? Angle change. Again, angle change, very important. So we keep this in mind and we know that we need an angle. Like this. These go down and they should connect the cube. So again, if these buildings they are not connected at the same ground level. So if they were, yes, they can. So if they had like this huge kind of what is it, advertisement thingies spread between the buildings, and we can compartmentalize and subdivide, or just connect these two front things. And why do I make this curve? Because it doesn't make sense if I just connect this to this. Actually, it does make sense. If I make this too flat, it does lag one impression. Because if it is closer to me, it has to come closer. And this is where this becomes essentially warped space. Because if it is closer to me, it has to be bigger. If it goes further away, it has to be smaller. So the space that used to be portrayed on a flat line suddenly becomes warped. Again, because this point is closer to us than these points on the side. Therefore, they would change in size. And if we continue this, the place where this weird advertisement thing would sit in our face, it would also deform. Basically come closer to us. This is very extreme, by the way. So this is a big square. And these squares, they would essentially shrink in size because they are further away. So if we go up and up and up and up in space, we would essentially have a form or a curve that goes like this. We have two of those, and then we say we got to cut this into pieces. And we would still have our big square, and this square technically would become smaller and smaller. This is more extreme, and overall there's a big flaw in this perspective, but it makes sense. It should make sense. So again, technically space would deform along your eye level horizon. So if you have a square, you are in the middle. This would be the only lines that would be horizontally and vertical. Every other line, because the part where it's closer to you, it has to deform. And if it's further away, it kind of, wait, this is weird. Wait, no, I'm not doing this right. There's manipulation going on. And this is kind of something that happens in fisheye. Because if it is further away, it shows the other information. Technically, there could be a wall. This could be a wall. There could be a telephone pole. There could be another telephone pole. And still, there is usually, this is a normal alleyway where we see the one ending of the road. But we also see the other ending. This is basically where you have your flat space. This is your alleyway. But the camera inside, this is your camera, it has a view angle of this, where it can capture all of these things, and due to the size of the distance change between this point towards the camera and this point, this is closer to the camera, so it would be bigger. And bigger is relative because the actual edge of objects, like your table, like this is you, this is your table, it would deform and basically bend. And then it would basically do something like this. And the table would be completely deformed. And so if you have a keyboard on this thing, it would also do this. Where you have your main basic identifiable piece of space, 1 point perspective square. And then it basically does this and this and this, and you have an angle change where something shifts from something vertically to something horizontal. Because again, if this continues, you know that eventually it ends at the vanishing point. And this would also bend around. Because we can draw, we can decide we lead the vanishing point there, or we decide to lead the vanishing point there. This is because we can draw, we can lead the road. And instead of having a road like this that is completely linear, we can still decide to bend our alleyway where we have a completely different kind of architecture in our city. And so the space, again, in its natural deformation would deform differently because it's not linear anymore, but it becomes broken. So it has to, if this is real, right, it has to create a much different perspective. Because architecture like this would look a certain way. Architecture that essentially looks like this, it would also look, something would have to happen. So again, we can lead the vanishing points. But what I'm looking at is this angle change that basically happens between the space, and this is where the space becomes what? It becomes bent, it's folding, as opposed to linear space that I'm missing my layers is not folding. Where's my space? Because the lines remain the same angle. And all of these lines, they remain the same. If I at any point start to twist these around, I'm folding space. Where did it go? I'm losing my weird place. All of these layers, where was I? There was I. There was. So again, we can say this happens on the ground. And essentially, let's say space is emitted from a single point. And this would go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because we are closer to it essentially. So something else would have to happen, and this is where things get really weird, because if I would stand in a doorway, me with the camera, the doorway ground would also deform. And this is really weird because the doorway would essentially form like this, and then like this. And then technically what I would miss is the building front that essentially extends from the ground to this vanishing point, and then you would have this entire wall basically be buildings. And there would be windows and technically things sticking out. What am I looking for? Something has to happen with the main space in this place. This is really weird. It works. I mean, I like this weird looking grid that I just put over this potato, but it kind of works. Okay, these could be compartments. This is the easy part. It's like I'm kind of thinking about these huge, crazy looking buildings where you park your car, parking lot things. Oh my god, Bunschan, what are you doing? Throwing biddies at me. I'm concentrating and suddenly it drops. It drops on my head. How are you doing, Buns? How's life? Yes, we would. Yes, we would. Now I'm even thinking about weird things regarding perception of space, and usually how we kind of believe that space is flat and it's just this. So this could be the image that we see. The image itself contains 3D information that is interpreted by our brain so that we get the idea of space, actual depth and distance, so that we actually know we can reach inside the space, so there is 3Dness. Um, so this would mean I have myself and there is my eye, and I perceive all the light that comes from around. Then I have an eyeball that basically has the ability, it couldn't view in like a cone, right? So your cone of vision. And let's say you have 800 180-degree cone of vision, which is a crazy amount. Technically, it shouldn't be this much. Let's say, what are these? 2040. We have 140 vision cone. This is our eye, and it can see all this much. So let's say I stick this kind of eye apparatus on a plane, and I have like 16 of those or 12 of those. Like, uh, yeah. And then instead of having this be a plane, I can have a grid that basically bends and deforms, and there I have my eyes, right? So I can have a perceiving apparatus that is a hollow sphere which has a million eyes and then perceives space. It can't even work, but I want this. I wanna, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. At some point, like space would be fragmented where it would distort itself because the eye can't perceive the information and the brain would still try to make sense of things, and it would kind of end up as a blurry kind of mess. That's what I imagine. My streams, most of them are available in my highlights or in my past broadcasts, including the good ones. They are labeled as educational in the title. This is like doing this kind of stuff with architecture would be just one step, but I want to do this fish eye with the human body. Like, it makes my senses so tingly when I think about the formation of space this way. It is the most sexy thing I could imagine. Like, usually you can't reference these things, so you can still look at a body in a fisheye view, but that's not it because you want to basically create it yourself. which means you want to be the fisheye. You want to have the imaginative power of this thing and then observe reality. I want to do this. Because, yes, please. There is a part that you cannot perceive, and this is where perception is the part. I don't know. Let's say you could have this eye, and I'm putting this on a plane with a 140-degree vision cone. So we can imagine this on a plane, right? This is our eye, so this is our cone of vision, like between these. So if we have a lens that would basically completely bend around, we still cannot see what is behind. So we would still see basically this being our cone of vision, or even complete, and we would see everything. But what would be this, right? So we would basically see our own eye, but that can't be, because how would this even work in 3D space? It's so weird. Space would be naturally warped along this grid. This would be the end. So we got it. We got it. Simple example. It makes sense for me. So this is our space plane, our eye plane, image plane. And now imagine this as a balloon, where these 2 points, your 4 outside points, basically, they would sit at the end of the balloon, and then you have these weird looking balloon butthole. So you would still have your geometry sitting on top of this balloon, but completely round. Wait, should be integrals. So my issue is, what curvature do I use? There's a round corner that basically just like this. This is where things get good. Drawing see-through is not my strong points. Yes, it would. It could have the appearance of a skyscraper. Like for scale-wise, just because it deforms so much. Ultra bad. Interesting name though. Definitely check out my previous weird educational highlights. Um, I still have these actually. What are you listing? It should actually list like a couple of those. This is so weird. So technically, I have like a super old drawing. Let's look at the date. Look at the date. I should actually delete those that time, long time ago. Part of deformation really is, let's say you have your normal square, and you're looking at this point because it is the closest to you. Depending on actually the lens or your visual cone, or I would, if it comes to drawing, all I really change is this angle towards something like this, where they kind of do this in tangent, they do this together. So the actual square would distort more and more and more, and all it really happens is that this point of the square is being pulled towards you because your visual cone is basically increasing from, let's say, a normal lens to a super wide angle lens. Technically, this would happen in degrees where you have to look through a camera to really get this effect. But when you draw, this is fairly simple because you start with a normal cube, and then you kind of pull and push things. You push things further away, and you pull things closer to you. Very, very extremified, and the top of the plane is still a normal square. It looks like something else, like a kite, like a diamond, where there's clearly no symmetry, but this is only because of the perspective distortion. So this is how it deforms on a cube. If you have different geometry, you have different kinds of crazy things going on. If you have organic form, and everything is round, like potatoes, spherical, cylindrical, custom, it yeah, it gets really crazy. It gets really crazy. What else? What else? I think most of the relevant stuff definitely found its way. Technically, it is a wide angle lens, but the thing is, you can draw in a way that is more flexible than any lens. The lens is fixed. It gives you a range from let's say 50 millimeters to 80, or I don't know, 100. When you draw, this all becomes flexible because you can jump around, and basically you can choose. It is your choice to grow your space linear and fixed and set, or you basically mold your space into something that doesn't exist, but you're working with normal perspective effects. This is where the illusion comes into play, and we can only draw this by making use of the illusion of perspective, the illusion of space, the illusion of depth. And again, the picture, the photograph could show you this. And it would be, oh, look, city. But the photograph can only show this if it has the capability in the lens. Because it has to capture this range, including the vertical range. If you want a better kind of I don't know, visual aid for Google about wide angle lens telelens comparison. I can't type. There should be images that explain things. And yes, there's one. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful. This is pretty much on point, and you can see the deformation. Oh my god, it's so tiny. It's so tiny, but you can see the way it deforms spherically. And this is what we did. This is basically the last image. Very simple and stupidified. You have a normal square, and then you do like snippety snap, do the magic, and you enhance and increase the amount of distortion. So again, when you look at the reference, so basically perspective as a whole, and there's like so much information. I look for, and I would only look for this one specific thing, because how does it show on paper? And it's not about the concept as a whole, but it is about how does the illusion work. And this means how do you draw something that looks like it is in perspective. And from this point, it kind of goes on and on and on. You have different layers of complexity where you have 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective, and you basically want this done on the fly. But look for how to draw. Don't look for how to basically use a crutch to limit your intuition and imagination, instead of meaning grids. So look for the basic understanding. This is something I, from my experience with art and beginners, and it seems to be that perspective grids seem like it's like a brick, and you bind it on your leg, and then you believe you have to study this brick to get the idea of things. But no, you have to get away from grids. Like, analyze the basic root, and you gotta dig deep in a way. But it doesn't work. This is what I would feel like when I think about how people deal with this in my experience. Like, and I'm the outsider, so I'm just, I have my opinion and my experiences, and I know how many people struggle with perspective. Like, I know this, and I know why I don't know, but fuck books, seriously. Excuse the language. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. If our field of vision, yes, I would assume so. Something would happen in the lens or in your optics. let's say the ability to draw perspective freehand. It is so much easier to actually use the brain and think and analyze before you use the crutch. And I hate the word because it's crutch. I don't know, the walking aid. Um, yeah. I mean, there's the assumption that you actually want to learn, and you as a general you. the serious apprentice has already stones in my books. Yes, crutch. This one. This thing. I don't know this thing. Words. Lame. Let's say starting and slowly I did experiments. And it all started with, again, knowing stuff in front is big, stuff in the back is smaller, and doing this plane by plane. Build one plane in perspective, build a second plane in perspective, then find out how to connect the third one in this one way, and how to connect the third one in another way to again boost the illusion of deformation in perspective, something, something, something. And from this point it goes on. You have your space, you draw another cube, and you figure out how to make this cube look like, I don't know, give it scale, give it something. Draw cityscapes, building by building. And it's essentially, it's just cube by cube. I did this kind of stuff, and I had fun doing this. Because doing this was more fun. It was basically no, I had no purpose, no reason to use perspective grids as any kind of tool, because I already knew that I had to have it in my brain. I wanted to have it in my brain, and effectively doing these exercises, for me, they they essentially led to me knowing how to construct perspective in 1, in 2, in 3 points by freehand in about 3 months. Like, what? And if I let it sink in, so yeah, arrogance, my accomplishment, huzzah. Um, so many people still struggle with perspective in ways that is beyond belief. Beyond belief. When the actual application, if you look at and analyze what is actually happening on paper in order to describe the illusion, it is so simple. And yet, yeah, there's this struggle that is just festering, and it makes no sense. There's no reason. There's no reason. I don't know why this is. I don't know why. There should be this one book, and I might actually have to do some research, which is kind of sucky. About, let's say, I would dig into what is available as the non plus ultra perspective education stuff. Like, look at how Scott Robertson does it. I know there are different books for perspective comics and such. What's up, Angry Monkey? Yes. Hi. There is something the brain has to get used to seeing, creating space. Like, think about this. We make space. This is essentially it. And when I did this, I wanted to be pulled into the space. I wanted to give me the impression of something is breathing and not just a flat thing. And this, again, the brain. For the brain to do this, it has to be able to create the illusion, because this is all space. Behold, behold. So there is a flexibility or a kind of dynamic behind how space is perceived um, through through the media. And thanks to the internet, we have so many pictures of so many different ways to like that show us the world, including microscopic stuff and X-ray, and we have macro lenses that can show us like these tiny ants. They appear super big, or we can use these crazy telescope things and look at ants and basically spy on ants and look around their body, right? Like they are gigantic. Let's say when it comes to the shape stuff, and even if it's random shapes, and I still have to identify like island horizon, so that do I see this from the bottom or do I see it from the top? And essentially this becomes the top or the front, because this is the bottom side, but essentially this can also be something that I see from the top. And still the brain essentially has to be able to identify that it can do something, or like give you an ability where you do something that gives you the illusion of space because your eye is trained to interpret something. I'm trying to fake this right now, so I'm trying to draw this weird looking hole. Like it looks like it just comes off the paper. It's paper. So again, I have to obey like parts of this visual language, where I know if it is back and there is less light, it becomes darker and darker. And technically I can just mess around with the values to make this easy. Oop. What's up, Wade? How's life? What day is it? Wednesday. How's your arts? Are you gonna do the art posse challenge? What do you got? What do you got? Couldn't draw. Something that would be interesting would is a draw something like this, but fill the entire canvas. That would be something. Which book is good for perspective study? I don't know. I don't know, honestly. I couldn't say. And it's like I would not choose a book. Like you don't need a book. You need the right kind of practice. And it's something you have to keep in mind. Don't rely on grids. It's something after what I explained, something you should try is to, like, right now try to decipher how to put the lines down on paper to immediately create perspective in space. Which is something small, something big, yoink yoink, and there goes. Two lines anchored, something small, yoink, there goes. Like it should be like, you know, instead of point, I'm suffering, but yeah, I'm a perspective grid, so yes, give me my coke, my heroin. Oh yes, no, no. I mean, if and nobody is asking for my opinion, but no, like don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. Please, please, save yourself from a world of limiting your intuition in so many different ways that, like, if you have the task, it is your task, your challenge to basically create understanding in your brain that lets you decipher how perspective works. And if it is this simple, start with a single plane. Everything else will follow because everything can exist inside your cube. This is something we know, and everybody says it. It's in books, and it makes sense. So this is your space box. If you can decipher how this works, and it works by something small, something big, these are connected, and you go on, right, to 2 point, and then you build 3 point. If you can build a sexy 3 point perspective cube, you can build very sexy scenes. And let's say when you see people coming from Feng Shui school and they present their like techie things, they know how to basically 3 point perspective so that you can have scale inside your image. And let's say you want to draw a car of some kind, and you want to put your car inside a nice space and not just, like this. Find out the space, meaning find out how to draw the box, which is essentially already deciphering all necessary things that you ever wanted to know about perspective. And it's just a box. Like, simple. Instead, using this aid, and especially after this weird rant that I had for 90 minutes about perspective and folding space and folding perspective things and vanishing points. It's all there. It's all really it's all there. And let's say you get the idea. This is when we do something wrong, we get the idea. So the assumption is that when we get the idea when we do something wrong, we should get the idea when we do something right. It might not all make click, but something is there that makes us perceive it. We can perceive the mistake, so we can perceive when it's not a mistake. It's essentially, everybody would have a good idea of the concept of perspective. 1 point, 3 point, everything, including fisheye. Like, just somewhere in the back of your brain, in the back of your mind, there is a memory. And it is a very faint memory, but it should be there. I'm pretty sure it's there. So, if we put it to the test, and this is like, gotta free a couple of hours and just start somewhere. At least collect the experience of how it doesn't work. And it could be a test to your own brain. Like, you have no idea how quick your brain could actually pick things up. If you say, okay, brain, it's just you and me. Now, if you don't wanna give me the understanding, we will have a bad time, and so you better give me the understanding. So, in a way, our brain will turn into Hulk. But at first, we have to tell our brain that, dude, I need you. I need you, brain. You have to be the man. You have to be like, show what you got. and you have no idea how quickly you could actually learn. Like you have no idea, like straight up, unless um, there might be a couple of people who have extensive experience with doing things, learning things, studying things. And this, in a way, you have to trust your own intuition. Trust yourself. This is it. Like, be the Jedi. You have to put trust in yourself before you put trust in the book. And this is something. It's probably something what I did, no doubt, because I had no trust in books. They were weird, and I had like no thanks, including books in English. English was not my forte. Um, so what I had a good idea of what I want to draw. I had comic books of Spider-Man and all this good stuff, Marvel, Image, DC, where I could absorb the perspective. And then it's just intuition. Give me things, and I will follow you. And I will keep the brain in my toe, so it will do the computation for the stuff. Here's something I'm shooting myself in the foot. Um, in a way. Okay, my train of thought is already gone. But it had to do with learning and definitely trusting yourself before this. But I'm trying to collect my thoughts. No, they're not coming back. Okay, there is a belief. There is still a very high belief in all mankind, basically, that art requires talent. And art requires a kind of talent, kind of creativity, or something that is born and innate. That is a true belief, uh, which is false. You can learn the right things to basically enable yourself to be creative freely in any kind of way, writing, dancing, music, drawing, painting, whatever. And most of us don't believe in talent. But when it comes to intuition, and this is a weird kind of concept, where you don't need anybody but just your own brain, your own mind, your own way of perceiving the world. And then suddenly there's no more intuition because it's all about where can I get the book. And again, like I know how it was to not have a teacher and I know the struggle, so here I am telling you, you guys don't need me, you would only need yourself. Which is true. Which is, effectively it's true. Maybe I should put on something more interesting. So technically it's definitely true. Okay, where does it come from, or where is the fascinating? I don't know. I'm drifting away. I'm trying to psychologically analyze the society's doings when it comes to building the humans or the young kids' sense for intuition. Because usually, yeah, I mean, I've done this myself, right? Where you gotta learn things. You have to learn things, and it's good to have somebody that helps, but eventually you can do it on your own. And then it becomes question of, do you believe in yourself? Or do you believe in you need help? You need this, you need that, you need reference, you need a teacher, you need video tutorials, you need books, you need a mentor, you need art school, you need drawing classes. I mean, I couldn't even be here if for some things we have to be at a kind of level where we can make sense of this world cognitively and act and communicate properly. What's up, Smolchy? 11 years in a row. Thanks for the resub. Welcome to the craziness. Enjoy the emotes, the burps. Almost a year. Yes, crazy. And I think you get a new sub badge next month soon. Technically, as far as I know, it should change because you subbed into the 12th months. So 11 months are in the past, so you are in your 12 months. Refresh your chat if you may. Maybe I need to refresh my chat. Nobody type. I gotta refresh my chat. Did it work? Is it dying? I don't know what it's doing. It says waiting. Okay, thanks for waiting. I don't think it actually ate my refresh request. Okay, Starchy, please say something. It's next to just a break. It's still the wing. Still the wing badge. Let's say not so much for learning the basics of perspective. Let's say maybe Scott Robertson has interesting knowledge in his approach to understand perspective. I wouldn't choose his approach because it does rely heavily on perspective grids, which still makes sense. He needs the kind of precision for the work that he does. He can't rely on just the kind of randomness, I guess. He wants to have the precision. He likes to do the industrial design, so they do need precision. Otherwise, he does have some nice techniques. Next month, yes, soon. Soon. Should be the skull. Yes. I like the skull. Wait, is it the skull? Gotta check. Should. I hope the perspective stuff made sense. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure there are good Google guides and YouTube videos that show you good things when it comes to perspective. Other than that, it's just basic practice, and keep in mind some of the things that I cover today, including when it goes back into space, it has to become smaller. And eventually, all this stuff that space can do, it's not really, let's say, if space has this superpower ability and it's this much, right? You have this much, this is what you can have in 3-point perspective grids. This is everything that you ignore. And this is basically for me. This is 90% of the fun. This is just, yeah, it's cool, it's good, and if I ever do any sort of architecture, I will do a perspective grid because I gotta have the precision. I want to be clean in my approach, so I would still kind of go natural about constructing my post before I do grids because my imagination and the way I perceive space is basically this. It is ever so flexible. It doesn't ever, just do this because it's a 3 point perspective grid. This is not something that I can condense into a perspective, and I wouldn't attempt this. But this is definitely fun. Like this is the fun stuff. This is the fun stuff. 3 point perspective is, yeah. I mean, if it's done without grids, fuck yes, like fist bump, chest bump, butt touch, thumbs up. But otherwise, it is a very kind of slow attempt. Let's say my imagination is racing at least 350 miles, maybe per minute if I'm fancy, per second possibly. So, um, telling my brain it has to do a 3 point perspective grid is like, no thanks. It would basically be the lazy mule that just says, no, dude, I can be the rocket guy, I can race, why would I be a packing mule that just has turtle speed? And again, like before I confine things into this weird box, I would basically explode the box, make it sing and dance to tell it what I wanted to do before I submit. If I would ever tell a tale, there would be a knight, and it would fight a demon. The demon would be representative of perspective grids, kind of like Don Quixote, the dude that fights the minions. I'm silly. Even putting this lady into space of perspective stuff. Come on. Like knowing where my eyeline horizon is and then just figuring out how to bridge the space, and I'm going from her shoulder to basically where my eyeline horizon is, and I would extend this forward into space, maybe move over. And let's say if I continue this twice, I would have the place where I would stand and observe this lady. And I am slightly elevated above, so that I do see the shoulders from the top, but I do not see too much of the chin or the jaw. And I would still see everything else from the top. So if there's a cube that she's standing on, it would be something like this. If I wanted to, I could figure out where is her shoulder in position to the legs and maybe guess that there would be her shoulders, possibly not really, more like this one. And then I would construct the same stuff that I have on the top, and I could locate basically the plane square. Every other square going off from this one would be seen from a different side. This is the most top that I can see. Everything else has a slight offset. And again, I'm bending the space way too much, so this would go around in this way, and this goes around. It's too weird. Let's say, making this simple, there could be a square and she's inside the square. So she's actually existing inside a cube. It could be a smaller cube. So if there is actual space, and again I have to keep in mind where is me, so if this tiny box would extend above her face, I would see it like this. And I would see the bottom plane. This would go up. Because my eyes are not above her head. This is why I don't see the top of the head. But if there's something above, I would definitely see it from the bottom. Does it still make sense? The perspective stuff with the buildings, it completely drew me away from my studies. And usually, not many things do it this way. The last time it happened like this was when I got into drawing nature and landscapes. I was completely absorbed and ignored my studies, and I was pretty happy doing something that is a little bit of fun, and I was still learning a lot instead of just doing the study grind. I think I will do another cityscape like this. And I've collected some interesting reference. I will not copy from reference, but there's some reference shots. They show, I don't even know, the way they show the space and the depth is very significant compared to others. That is something I want. I kinda, when I think about the first building, let's say you have your picture frame, even with the grids, like the first building could just be this. But instead of starting at this point where you have a clear starting perspective like this, I would choose a different starting perspective where I see the building differently rotated further to the sides. So the grid essentially, it follows the lines, but it would reach the point where it has the vertical barrier at a different place. And still I could extend it the other way, and the only lines that I use to start the grid is this one, because it already sits on the grid, and this one, it already sits on the grid. It is part of the grid. This is the extension. And then you have angle change, where you have something, this is your base, you move it over to something vertically. If you move it over further, it becomes your horizon. And then you have your very crazy grid. If you pull this forward, you have the distortion that sits on top of the building. And this is something we illustrated earlier, where you have your square, and you change the distortion basically on these two lines only, and you pull this forward so that the distortion actually becomes very extreme. And still, all you really do is you have this is your base, and this moves along until it hits this barrier, and you have this angle change. So this point on this kind of square is this point in our scene. Basically, depending on where we can lead this, we can lead it this way and say there are roads, otherwise there would be buildings. This would be the first one. And this building inside our grid would still exist, but at a different place. Effectively, it would exist in this place. Because between this one and this one and this one, you have your normal perspective grid. But at some point it changes. Maybe. It's weird. I don't know. What's up, Snowmule? How you doing? I love this perspective stuff. I wanna. Yes, please. Oh my god, I'm gonna eat this up just because it's so sexy. Yes. No, I'm just quiet. I'm relaxing my brain. Can't always poop up knowledge. Can't even poop out the small talk. It's not a skill. Sometimes. I'm fine, I'm getting hungry. I'm really getting hungry. I was sleepy, and still I want to draw this perspective stuff. It's stuck in the rabbit holes. 3 point. 3 point perspective rabbit holes.